Hello and welcome to the Little Knowledge Podcast, where this time out, we're actually exploring a building that we initially wanted to explore over 3 years ago or thereabouts. We didn't because we didn't have enough images of the building inside and out historically. We still don't, but we've decided to do it anyway.
We have. We're like that.
It's just a conversation. Anyway, I'm Paul Busby, and with me as always is Goff Morgan. Hello, Goff.
Hello, everybody. Hello. Good evening, Stu. How are you doing? We're in.
We can't avoid Morgans.
No.
We did Morgans of Tredegar 2-parter, and now Llantarnam Abbey might contain Morgans. There's the warning put on this. Might very well contain Morgans.
Yeah. It's like allergy advice, isn't it? Warning, this podcast might contain Morgans.
If you're allergic to Morgans, please look away now. Llantarnam Abbey, just off the bat, haven't done this for a while. If I said Llantarnam Abbey to you, Goff, you're a local boy, what does that mean to you?
A hint of mystery.
Oh, really?
Frankly. Yeah. Because if you go up and down the road via Llantarnam, where Llantarnam Abbey is, there was always this little gate with Llantarnam Abbey written on it, and you could never go through it. And you always wondered what is behind there, because it was still occupied till a very, very recent period. And obviously you got the word Abbey, and you knew that there were the nuns of St. Joseph that were there, and then how long they'd been there, and then they had a connection with Llantarnam Grange Arts Centre in the middle of Cwmbran, because that was part of their property as well at one point, the Grange being a sort of farm manor house type situation.
Yeah, they had
so I've always been, but I've never ever really understood too much of the history of the place, and what it looks like, even what the currency of it is, and other than the fact that there were nuns. We did come across Reginald Blewitt.
Yay!
We know Reginald Blewitt, who was the editor of the Monmouthshire Merlin, or
the founder
of the Monmouthshire Merlin newspaper, and what could only be described as an oleaginous rag. You feel sticky reading the Monmouthshire Merlin. He's very, very pro-establishment as it stands at the time, and very fawning to the county as well. Except on one possible occasion, which I'm not sure we're going to address, and I'll keep quiet about.
We will touch on things, but there's so much to cram in, so many centuries. So why don't we start in our time-honoured fashion? Let's get a 19th century map up on the screen. So here we got Llantarnam. And if we zoom in, we see Llantarnam Abbey, remains of Cistercian Abbey. With their tithe barn.
Yeah.
Now, the big change, the actual park itself here, and with the Avon Clwyd, the river here, is it this bit? This bit near the road has altered quite a bit, because if we do our usual fade in, cut out by the road. Of course, you've got the new town, you could say, of Cwmbran right up here.
Yeah.
And that little gate, which we will look at, is all the way here.
Oh, right.
To get to the Abbey itself, you now have to go under the underpass.
Yeah.
You come all the way up here. So the Abbey is, in itself, very peaceful. You can see why the nuns held retreats there until recently, can't you?
Yeah. Oh, it is. Yes, it's much further back from the road than I anticipated. It's a bigger land estate now.
And long may it stay that way, but you never know.
No.
Okay, so we need to go right back with this, because not nuns. We need to go all the way back to the 1190s to start this story, with the founding of the Cistercian Abbey of Llantarnam on that site. Yeah. And it was a daughter house, they call it, to the main abbey, which was in Ceredigion. And that looked a bit like this. This is Strata Florida.
Oh, right. I've heard of Strata Florida.
Yeah, that's in Ceredigion. So Llantarnam was a daughter house to this. This is what Strata Florida looks like today.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it will be. There we go.
Oh, right.
But the name, as I said, they were Cistercians. The name Llantarnam is quite interesting as well, because it might be a corruption of Llantorvain, because the river used to be called Torvain.
Yes.
So it might be that. But my favourite is it could be Nant Tiernon, Tiernon's Brook. So Llantarnam became Llantarnam because Tiernon was a character in one of the stories in the Mabinogion, and he was called the best man in the world.
Oh, no, really?
I love the idea of Llantarnam literally meaning chapel of the best man in the
Chapel of
world.
the best man in the world. Isn't that wonderful? Yeah. Yeah, that would look good on a heady note paper, wouldn't it? Very cool, yeah. So why was he particularly good?
Oh, he was marvellous.
Was he?
Good PR, I think.
Oh, so he should technically be the man with the best PR in the world.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't know if
Am I right that Strata Florida now is maintained by Cadw? Is that right?
I believe it is, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Llantarnam, though, was sometimes mixed up. It was called Llantarnam Abbey. Llantarnam Abbey, alias Llantarnam. That's what it's mentioned in some early 13th and 14th century documents. We know they had 60 monks there at one time. And they are Cistercian monks, the white monks of Llantarnam. As you said, they had these granges, 13 or 14, which did the farming. They had an awful lot of land. You know, the big gate you talked about, which was, there was an original gate, which I can only assume looked similar to that, which cut off the old abbey from the rest of the world. And it was a huge gate called Magna Porta.
Oh,
great gate.
Great gate.
So great was this gate that the main estate that Llantarnam Abbey owned, in front of the gate, wasn't called Llantarnam Abbey Estate. It was called the Magna Porta Estate.
Oh, gosh. For heaven's sake.
And they weren't as rich as Tintern.
Yeah.
They weren't as rich as Llantoni. But what they actually had was they were Welsh, which the other two really weren't, because they were sort of Anglo-Norman. Because the man that set up Llantarnam Abbey was a lord of Caerleon called Howell ap Iorwerth.
Oh, right.
And it's quite rare to have this Welsh-founded abbey. Yeah. And throughout its history, it's stuck to that. Howell ap Iorwerth, by the way, is an ancestor of the Morgan family.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. Via the Lords of Caerleon bit that they claimed in later years.
Well done. Through the Lords of Caerleon bit, they claim. Now, it's not easy, of course. Llantarnam wasn't one of the bigger abbeys. When they were making £71 a year, I think Tintern were making £120 a year. So it was all right, but it wasn't enormous. And it doesn't help when Gilbert de Clare came along. Gilbert de Clare, who built Caerphilly Castle, arch enemy of Sir Morgan ap Meredydd, who we've talked about. And Gilbert de Clare, and this is the way it's put, it's 1272, and it says, Gilbert de Clare took from the monks, in the name of discharge, the greater part of their possessions, and promised them the equivalent in lands and rents and other things, but nothing was done.
Heaven's sake. So basically, he did the old Norman method of turning up and nicking people's stuff.
He did indeed. In fact,
how the Normans got on.
In fact, when the church tried to work out why things had gone wrong for Llantarnam Abbey, there was a sort of a veiled attack on Gilbert de Clare when the nuns merely said that wild animals have devoured all the land. I don't know. 1398, fire burns the abbey down.
Oh.
Now, how many books were lost there, how many documents? Yeah. That's why it's quite tricky to find early documents about Llantarnam Abbey. And in 1405, keeping up with the Welshness, Owain Glyndwr's rebellion sweeps through. He attacks Tintern Abbey. He attacks Llantoni Abbey. He doesn't touch Llantarnam Abbey.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
because it's seen as Welsh.
Because it's the Welsh Abbey,
not the Anglo-Norman abbeys. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And it helped that the abbot of Llantarnam at the time was a mate. Abbot John ap Howell was a supporter of Owain Glyndwr.
Oh, interesting.
In fact, so much so that when Owain Glyndwr's son Gruffydd ap Owen was about to launch a huge attack on Usk, Abbot John ap Howell actually took confession of his troops before the battle, blessed them, gave a little pep talk, little speech, and then joined them as they attacked Usk Castle.
Well, you've got to remember at this point that these ecclesiastical figures were as much landowning barons as everybody else. They just had a religious title. I mean, you would get your local abbots and bishops and people like this. They would raise armies and go into into scraps as well. I mean, they were very, very much more temporally involved in their land, in the involvement of their land. They weren't just spiritual figures at all like they are nowadays.
That's absolutely true. Well, we know what happened when this great host attacked Usk Castle, because Usk was basically burnt to the ground by Owain Glyndwr, so local sympathy in Usk, at least, was not necessarily with him. And so they managed to...
Hang on, this is Usk Castle, I presume?
This is bit of Usk Castle.
Bit of Usk Castle.
It looks today. But we know from Adam of Usk that they were prepared for the attack. And Adam of Usk was a local chronicler. He said the castle had been strengthened when the great host hit it, and inside several of the king's men were there, with far stronger than the Glyndwr host thought it was going to be. And inside they made a sortie in force from the castle and captured the leader and his men, driving them relentlessly through the River Usk, where many of them, most notably the abbot of Llantarnam, were killed, either at the point of a sword or by drowning in the river. And 300 of that Welsh army. Now, Usk Castle looks lovely there, and it is lovely, Usk Castle, isn't it?
Yeah.
But just outside Usk Castle, after this failed attack in 1405, 300 men were beheaded.
Oh, good Lord. Oh, gosh.
Kind of ruins the view,
never knew
doesn't
any
it?
of this. Good Lord.
Kind of ruins the view, that.
Yeah. Yeah. My gosh, 300. I've never heard of that. Well.
I love the fact the abbot of Llantarnam was in amongst them. But like you said, we should be looking at him as a landowner.
They were temporal figures. They weren't spiritual figures, really. They had these became massive lands, massive estates, massive incomes, and you fought to keep them. And you raised armies the same as any other lord or baron of the area. Yeah, it's astonishing.
Now, of course, things were improving. They were always a sort of a middling abbey. But of course, what can go wrong? They've seen off that. It's now the 1530s. Surely nothing can go wrong now for this most blessed of abbeys.
Oh, I know. And along comes Henry. Yes, well done. Well done.
Henry VIII had got £66 off Llantarnam Abbey as a donation to help fund his war against Francis I of France. But of course, that's not going to save Llantarnam Abbey of 1536. And at the time, they were down to 6 monks and 17 servants. So whereas it was 60 way back in medieval times, by Tudor, they really are down to only 6.
Yeah.
And yeah, they were making £71 a year, but that's not going to save you, is it?
No.
The dissolution of the abbey occurred.
Yeah.
They used to make a bit of money, Llantarnam Abbey, from basically being the ones that owned a pilgrimage to Penrhys. Have you heard of the Penrhys pilgrimage? They go from Llandaff, past Llantarnam Abbey, all the way up to the Rhondda, and there was a statue of the Virgin and Child and a holy well. And it became a big pilgrimage route. You can still see some of the lanes that led to it today.
Oh, right. And the Virgin in Child?
No, the Virgin and Child.
Oh, Virgin and Child. I thought you maybe had a picture of the pregnant Virgin Mary there. I've never actually seen one of those.
No.
Crops up in all sorts of ways, though. She has a great back catalogue of images, doesn't she? All right.
There was one man that didn't like this idea of the Virgin and Child at Penrhys and all the money being made out of it, and it was this man making his second appearance on our podcasts. It's Thomas Cromwell.
Well done, Thomas Cromwell. God.
So he seized it, as well as one from Ipswich, took it to London and burnt it in London, trying to stamp out the pilgrimage route of Penrhys.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it?
Of course, today, in the 1950s, it took them until the 1950s to build another one.
Oh, right. So it's back. Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And people still go on pilgrimage from the gates of Llantarnam Abbey to Penrhys to this day.
Well, I never knew that. Isn't that fascinating? Well.
Now, when they closed up the abbey and stripped the abbey, it was given to a chap called John Parker, who was something to do with the king's horses. So he had it initially. This is 1537, 1538. Now, this is interesting for later on. We know it's documented. They sold off all the silver plate, the lead from the roof, and the bells, but there is no mention of any stone being sold.
Oh, interesting.
which might be interesting for what fabric Llantarnam Abbey was later to use or reuse.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It also means that probably the building was left substantially intact. Because if it had been really, practically razed to the ground like an awful lot of the Abbey buildings were, then that stone would have been flogged off and used elsewhere. But the fact, so it implies that an awful lot of the original structure survived post the Reformation.
You would hope so. You'd think so. Eventually, via the Earl of Pembroke dabbling, because of course the Earl of Pembroke always dabbles in any land really in South Wales back then. It went to a Morgan.
Oh,
in the 1550s.
John, is it a John Morgan?
It is not a John Morgan.
Oh, I know there was a John Morgan of Llantarnam. We may get to him later then.
No, this was a William Morgan.
Oh, what's the chances of that?
And he was
William, Charles, or John. Yeah.
William Morgan of Pentrebach, and Pentrebach is not far from Llantarnam Abbey. And what William Morgan did when he bought it, he managed to buy back a lot of the old Abbey lands and, like a jigsaw puzzle, put them back together.
Oh, that's intriguing.
William Morgan's grandfather was a Morgan of Pencoed, which of course means that this Morgan is another descendant of the Morgans of Tredegar, another cadet branch.
Yeah.
So he takes over Llantarnam Abbey, but his old house of Pentrebach is quite interesting. I think when he moved to Llantarnam and built a house there, the youngest son of that family then lived at Pentrebach, where he used to live. Pentrebach is now a farm, and it's just off. It is in Llantarnam, so it's quite close to the Abbey. Fascinating building. This is what it looks like today. Now, we have seen, of course, you always see sort of barns being turned into houses, but they kept this bit, which is the sort of 16th century bit, but the 17th century sort of mansion add-on in the 18th century, they turned that into a barn.
Oh, is that
a massive barn?
Isn't that odd?
And there's a story, Goth.
Oh.
Fred Hando, and way before him, Octavius Morgan, so two local historians, wrote about the incident at Pentrebach. And the way they told the story was, there was a huge party in this hall of Pentrebach. And there were so many people dancing and enjoying themselves that the portraits fell from the walls and scared everybody who fled out of Pentrebach.
How I end up how it's odd.
Now, there is also another odd thing, whether there are two people mixing stories or putting one story on top of another, but there are tales in later years of a poltergeist at Pentrebach.
Oh, really?
So maybe those portraits falling off the walls had nothing to do with dancing too much.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Now, I made the mistake, Goff, of using AI after our great success of the Gambling Toddler, now Tredegar House Part 2. Watch it if you're not of nervous disposition. I typed into this now. Can you try to recreate that scene in Pentrebach House of the portraits falling from the walls as they danced?
Yeah.
And AI came up with this troubling image.
Oh, good Lord. It can't do noses, can it?
Not only can it not do noses, this woman here appears to have had her head smashed against the wall. Oh, dear, oh, dear.
That's quite wild. I quite like that. That's quite crazy, isn't it? Look at it. Bizarre, almost surreal sort of thing, yeah.
It's good that Pentrebach
It looks like
survived.
people, but it's not quite people in the pictures. Even the portraits are horribly distorted faces. It's
like
really
something out
cool.
of a nightmare.
Yeah, it is. It's nightmarish, isn't it? I rather like that one.
Well, William, it's better than the baby, perhaps. William Morgan built a house there. And what did he build it out of? He must have built it out of stone left over from the actual old monk's abbey.
Yeah.
And there is an old image of it, a rare image of it before the rebuild. Yeah. So there we are, or Llantarnam Abbey.
Llantarnam.
Yeah, Llantarnam. So we have the Morgans. The Morgans have taken over, and the Morgans become rather quickly very Catholic. So this was the Catholic branch of the Morgans at Llantarnam. It fits, sort of, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, just to refresh what my understanding of it, when you call them as a cadet branch,
yeah.
I mean they're a separate line of the family that stems from like a third or second son or something like.
Yeah, they're a branch of the family that have set up home on their own and produced their own little dynasty. They are a branch to the main Tredegar tree.
Yeah, but they're generally founded by a third or fourth son or something like that, aren't they? Who goes off and establishes themselves elsewhere.
Who would never inherit.
Would never inherit the principal properties now.
So the Morgans were so powerful politically because they were more like a clan, because they had all these Morgans scattered around with their own estates. Yeah. Made them very, very powerful local family having that.
Yeah. But you tend to think of the principal family without realizing all the other offsets of the family that were set around, which also formed part of their power base as well.
Certainly did, yeah. Certainly did. They were quite wealthy, these Morgans, the Morgans of Llantarnam. They married well. I mean, William, who built this house, was married to the daughter of a Mansell of Margam.
Oh.
His son married Frances Somerset, one of the fair daughters of Raglan Castle, who was the daughter of the Earl of Worcester. And she had a Jesuit, Father Robert Jones, who converted her to Catholicism independently of her husband, and not just her, but all of her sisters. So all the fair daughters of Raglan became Roman Catholic. In fact, when Frances died, she set up maintenance for 2 Jesuits, one in North Wales and one in South Wales. It's quite dangerous stuff.
Yes, it is, isn't it, at that period?
But it's how it continued. I mean, there's got a baronetcy, Sir Edward Morgan, one of 3 Edward Morgan baronets in the 17th century that lived there. And he actually helped found the Jesuit HQ for Wales in Cwm in Herefordshire.
Blimey.
And they didn't do that well with the Tudors, but they did better with the Stuarts. He was involved in the Bishops' War in the early 1640s. And he got permission to get money from Catholic donors. And that was it. Parliament were furious about this. Yeah. Charles I's reaction was to make Edward Morgan a baronet.
Oh, gosh.
So the colours were firmly on the Stuart. A lot of Catholics, of course, were Stuart supporters.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but a lot were. But when, of course, the war was lost, he was captured. Sir Edward was captured at Hereford, fighting for the king. His estate was sequestrated. He was held, and they said, oh, well, you've got a lot of money. They were a great recusancy family. Recusancy meaning you would pay a fine so you wouldn't have to go to see an Anglican service. They were, I think pretty much they were one of the highest taxed in the country for recusancy fees.
Gosh.
Edward Morgan, for instance, had to pay 2/3 of his income from rentals in recusancy fees.
Blimey.
So this faith meant something to the Morgans of Llantarnam.
Yeah.
And he was told, oh, you can go. He was captured at Hereford. He was told, well, you can go back to Llantarnam Abbey. He got back to Llantarnam Abbey, back with his wife. Next day, they arrest him again, take him back to Gloucester, and he was imprisoned for 2 years and lost his estate.
Gosh.
They eventually got it back, basically by, I think, pretending to be Protestant.
Yeah.
So the next Edward pretended to be Protestant. However, before we get to that particular one, we've got a quite fun little bit, because Sir Edward Morgan of Llantarnam had a sister called Winifred.
Yeah.
And Sir Edward had a wonderful library at Llantarnam Abbey, the Morgans did. And she ran off and she married a man called Percy Enderby. And Percy Enderby was from Lincoln, and he had a great passion for history. Percy loved history. He came to Wales. He was so enthusiastic. Other historians sniffed at him, saying he was more enthusiastic than talented. But we all know what historians can be like. Very sniffy against other people. And it should be said that Percy Enderby, he was so smug, I think, that he got access to this library. He starts one of his books. And here's the book he published in 1661. Cambria
Triumphant, yeah.
1661. And he starts it by basically writing, here I am sat in the library of Llantarnam Abbey, like the cat that got the cream. Should be said, for all the mockery that Enderby had, and he learnt Welsh and he took it, he might not have been the most academic, but he was great at collecting the research. His research especially genealogical, was used by Williams and by Bradney for their far better received histories of Monmouthshire in later generations.
Oh, interesting.
So our last little jig into AI, this is our version of Percy Enderby being modest in the library of Llantarnam Abbey. Who's got access to all the documents now?
Well, he's looking very perky. That's all I can say.
Yes. He was the one that wrote, ages ago, a lifetime ago, we did Llanrumney Hall, and he was the one that wrote the poem which says, and Pencarn and Pencoed and Llanrumney must bend the knee to Tredegar. To Tredegar, they must bend the knee. That's it.
Yeah.
So there he is.
That's quite fun.
It's quite fun. So the Morgans, one of the three baronets, Sir Edward Morgan at Llantarnam, they get the estate back, but they're still really, I mean, they must have been riddled with priest holes, that building, that old property.
I was wondering that, yeah. That was the first thing that struck me. Well, yeah, how much what they were up to with it, because it was a politically dangerous statement to make, to be Catholic at this period. We know from the things that were going on, major witch hunt trials and guns, what else were happening? Not witch hunt, Catholic witch hunts that were going on around it for people, not literal witch hunts.
Yeah. Well, if you want to know more about that, do watch our Llanfihangel Court episode, where we talk about John Arnold, who was not only an MP, but the chief priest hunter in Monmouthshire in the 1670s. And Arnold became a friend of this man, Father David Lewis.
Oh, we've met him, I feel.
And Arnold was the one that says, in Llantarnam Abbey, we discovered a chalice, we discovered rosary beads, we discovered, the Catholic implements, and they knew that Father David Lewis was indeed saying mass. He was sheltered by the Morgans of Llantarnam.
Oh,
that's how it worked.
Yeah.
But again, as you say, very dangerous. I mean, a generation or so before this, their own kinsman at Tredegar House, old Sir William Morgan of Tredegar, dobbed them in. Created a list of known Catholics in Monmouthshire and gave it to the authorities, including his own cousin, Edward Morgan of Llantarnam. So it's very dangerous. But nevertheless, as we say, sadly, David Lewis was captured at the church near Llantarnam Abbey and ended up, of course, brutally killed. Hence, you see, whenever you see a martyr, you've got that little knife.
I know, it's something that does, as a one of those very, very slack Church of England or Church in Wales. I always find this iconography absolutely astonishing. Because if you look at him from neck up, it's a perfectly reasonable portrait. You look down, there's all sorts of bits stugged in, jugged in. These type of portraiture I find really boggling.
Yeah.
Go back into the Renaissance period. There's all these things that just seem bizarre.
Aren't they just?
Yeah. So he was remarkably composed for a man with a knife stuck in the middle of his chest.
Oh, I'm sure his faith did him good. He was, in 1970, made St. David Lewis, hence the St. David Lewis Church in Newport, and there was a Catholic primary school as well.
Yeah, there's actually a commemorative stone on the site of his execution in Usk.
There is indeed, and I think we showed that on the Llanfihangel Court video. So more about him, you'll certainly find it there. So the Morgans managed somehow, Morgans of Llantarnam, to navigate these perilous waters. But you had to be diplomatic to do so. And one nephew, the third baronet, Sir Edward Morgan, had decided that he wasn't going to have any kids. And his uncle, Sir James, was, even by his regards, a violent zealot for Rome. And if he couldn't stop him getting the baronetcy, but he could stop him getting the Llantarnam Abbey estate, which is what he did. He passed it on to, in the end, to a sort of a niece, Frances Bray, and from Frances Bray it passed on to the Blewitts. So the Blewitts, you could say, in the maternal line, are indeed related to the Morgans.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah,
because we've still got this sort of trail at this point, at least.
Well, they were part of that oligarchy. They said that ran everything. And they all intermarried. We don't, and that's one thing we discovered most, I think, over the course of the past 3 years, is how much this group of people, the county set, actually literally ran everything in the county set and married in amongst each other. Very small gene pool, really.
Yes, absolutely. And this is a lovely little, this is in 1810 or thereabouts. Again, it's looking quite nice, Llantarnam Abbey. Yeah. But appearances could be deceptive because this was when it was basically abandoned in the 18th century. People didn't seem to want to live there very often at all. Indeed, so much so when Archdeacon Cox came by in 1799, he wrote this of Llantarnam Abbey: "It is a large, antiquated mansion, damp, dreary, which having been long untenanted, exhibits an appearance of gloom and decay. The only remains of the ancient structure are the stone cells converted into stables, the walls of the garden, and a beautiful Gothic gateway, which is still called Magna Porta, and was the grand entrance."
Oh, that's interesting. So the monks' cells were converted into stable blocks.
Yeah.
Isn't that fascinating?
But I do wonder, you see.
Well, that shows a lot of fabric of the old building was still, of that original building was still standing in, because that's, if nothing else, the stable block stems from the period of the original abbey.
Of course, there's no way of Cox knowing how much fabric was in the building itself, in the walls, for instance.
Oh, quite.
So it's difficult to judge how much stone, but I'll be surprised if there wasn't still a fair bit of the old abbey incorporated. Because remember, William Morgan got all the parcels of land together. Why wouldn't he use bits of the abbey?
Well, quite, yeah.
So it's possible.
And so much of it wasn't distributed. So yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? It's really interesting.
So Henry Prothero, by the way, he was a colliery owner. And I've been chatting a while back to an historian called Stephen Carter, who's done a lot of work on him. And we might need a separate program to dig into Sir Henry Prothero. Prothero with an E, by the way.
Yeah.
But he was a piece of work as well. Our dear old Thomas Prothero appears to have worked as his solicitor in the early days.
Oh, yeah.
And in 1816, there was a general strike. There was a great strike. And Sir Henry Prothero, who made a fair bit of his money by slave trading, they'd actually cut the miners' wages by half, precipitating this strike. And this is him trying to molly trying to sort of help things. He says to the miners, "Half a loaf, surely, you misguided people, is better than none."
Oh, good Lord.
And apparently Stephen reckons...
that's all right then.
And Stephen reckons there's something that Thomas Prothero may have been there amongst the crowd, grabbing the leaders of the crowd and the protesters.
Yeah.
But the Blewitts weren't too happy because they said that Sir Henry Prothero basically wrecked the joint.
Oh.
He left it in a terrible state. He sold stuff he wasn't entitled to. There must just be something about the name Prothero, E or otherwise, at that time.
Yeah. What a bunch.
But eventually, the Blewitts, eventually in the early 19th century, after Prothero leaves, they do take over Llantarnam Abbey. A Major Blewitt takes over, and when he dies, his son Edward Francis Blewitt should take over, but there's a problem with this. Edward Francis, and there's terrible testimony in the newspapers, which shows that he was declared a lunatic, and but not necessarily sent to an institution. He appears on the census, living at Llantarnam Abbey, looked after, it would appear, by his brother Reginald, his younger brother, Reginald Blewitt.
Oh, that's
interesting. Fascinating. He was clearly very, very troubled. So that meant that the second son, Reginald Blewitt, took over. And he was the one in 1834 to 1836 that hired T.H. Wyatt, that architect that appeared again and again and again on this podcast. There was even a portrait on the walls of Hensel Castle of Wyatt, you might remember. He came in and he was brought in really... Blewitt was impulsive, let's put it this way. He was an impulsive man. And he decided to pay £50 to mend the roof of his new house, Llantarnam Abbey. £50. 60 grand later, he'd rebuilt the thing. DIY got out of hand.
Oh my Lord. Woof, that's a phenomenal amount for the time.
And he changed...
Grand, phenomenal.
Especially when you started off 50 quid to fix the roof.
Well, yeah. Look about spiralling costs. Dear me.
And he changed it from that to that.
Oh, yeah, almost into your strawberry Gothic of Horace Walpole there, aren't you?
He had his conservatory.
They're really doing, yeah. Oh, yeah, gosh.
Yeah, his gardener was called Mr. Hooky. I bet he rarely turned up for work.
Oh dear, dear, dear. That's going to need a glossary entry in the comments.
Anyone overseas? I haven't got a clue what we're talking about there.
I'll just explain. Playing hooky, everybody. Playing hooky is another means for truancy from school. There you are. Thank you very much. You don't need to get your slang dictionary out now.
That's still our favourite. I don't know whether we've. Could you explain? Was it you that loved telling this story, or was it Alan Hall? Was it the Duke of Devonshire or the Duke of Rutland? You know the story about when the Duke spoke to his. It's all about how you can't understand an accent.
Oh yeah,
too posh. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, the time of the investiture of Prince Charles, and the Duke of Devonshire was in charge of it. So everybody comes out to give a speech at Carnarvon Castle, and he goes, yeah, of course, those coming from back there, still forward a minute, and also going to get the coming back there, and then we whoa, and there was this ominous pause because nobody understood a word, and then somebody stepped forward and said, His Lordship has just said. Translated it.
Not translated into Welsh, translated into English.
Let's
have a little closer
look. This is fascinating. Now, this is Blewitt's house then.
Blewitt's creation.
But it really is it's a Gothic fantasy, isn't it? Now, I mean, he's put a tower in there for a start. You've got all those sort of onion sort of domes and things and other things. But so he's added all these bits and bobs onto it. Apart from the standard conservatory things that are added in, but he's really changed the whole look of it into that Gothic fantasy.
Yeah, and we'll have a little look closer.
As a side, this was when Gothic was spelt with a K on the end.
Yes,
two types of Gothic.
There are.
This is what I say. This is Strawberry Hill Gothic, I think it's called. Okay, dating from the Strawberry Hill, which was the house of Horace Walpole, who it originated the idea of Gothic literature, but he wrote a story just to go with his house, basically.
Two types of Gothic, two types of magic, but that's another
podcast. Story altogether.
We have a little closer look here. We can see Blewitt has left his family crest on it, and why not? But if we look closer, I love the fact that the Blewitt arms are, you get lions, you get griffins, get squirrels.
Squirrels rampant at the side. Is it? I can't be that those way. Oh my goodness!
And the motto is "Fortune favors the bold," and that's the Blewitt. Very interesting. In the 80s, when at Llantarnam Abbey, they found a seal in Old English words, with a squirrel on it, which they said was from. I think it might actually be a pastiche by Blewitt, because the squirrel is Blewitt.
Oh, right, interesting. Oh, interesting.
And the squirrel, as I've looked into this, what did anyone else use a squirrel? What on earth is going on here? And very few people did. Very few people. But I found a magnificent coat of arms, which looks exactly like the old Morgan Griffin, but with a squirrel. And it's a town in Austria. And I've put them side by side, and it is the most wonderful heraldic thing I've ever seen. If you're thinking about it, a squirrel doesn't work quite as well as a griffin if you need a beast. So, as you can see, the old Morgan Griffin. And in Austria, squirrel.
Whoa! He's a very perky little squirrel. He wouldn't want to catch him in the dark alley. He's got his claws out.
He's ever so slightly startled, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, he's going to have you. What I find is it. I mean, the squirrel is all associated with industry, isn't it? The industrious squirrel that sets aside the way for the future. So he's making when he's choosing his heraldic animals. So I always say when people are choosing their stuff, they're using the animals for the other messages that they convey, which makes Prothero's raven all the more worrying.
Yeah.
But so Mr. Blewitt's a squirrel. Oh, well done.
Mr. Blewitt's a squirrel.
Is this the Blewitt associated with the Monmouth and Merlin, or was that a later Blewitt?
No. This is the one Reginald Blewitt. Reginald James Blewitt. Yeah. Now this is great. Because what we've got here is he has rebuilt Magna Porta. He's called it, but some people call it sort of Port Mauer rather than Magna Porta because I guess it was modelled on the original gate.
Yeah,
But this is 1830s. But can you see this creepy little gargoyle here?
Yeah, fascinating.
Blewitt put up there. And I don't want to worry anyone in Cumbraen, But here we see the creepy little gargoyle. But if we see Portmawr today, he's gone.
Oh my lord.
I like to think he's abroad in Cumbran, causing chaos and havoc.
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh, I thought that gate was the gate that was still standing. I've driven past that so many times.
Yeah, and I tell you, next time you turn up, they call it Magna Porta, and they'll be terribly impressed by your knowledge. It's great. Now, this Reginald Blewitt, you are right, Goth. Reginald Blewitt is the chap that founded the Monmouthshire Merlin. He was editor for about 3 years. Reginald Blewitt is a Liberal MP. Monmouthshire Merlin started off as a Liberal newspaper, but his arch enemy, who he beat to become an MP, Bailey, was a Conservative who built his own paper called the Monmouthshire Beacon. And in the early days, the Merlin and the Beacon were just foul about each other. These two organs that, to fire, Blewitt's awful and Bailey's wonderful and vice versa, depending on which you picked up. Complete propaganda rags.
Yeah, they are. They really are. Oh, yeah, but I haven't read the... what's the second one? The Bailey
Beacon,
one? The Beacon. I haven't read any of that, but the Merlin is a total propaganda rag. Absolutely astonishing.
I think that's safe to say. It has Blewitt, by the way, started. He likes to write. This is the other reason you might know Reginald Blewitt, because initially he wrote a satirical poem in 1827, because he was going to be a lawyer originally. A satirical poem on one of our favourite legal entities, actually, Goth, Chancery.
Huzzah, Chancery.
Making fun of Chancery, and that did quite well. Now, we reckon that he also wrote another book.
Well, this is one of the great mysteries, isn't it, of early 19th century Gwent and Monmouthshire. What Monmouthshire is it at that time? Memories of Monmouthshire, is that what it's called?
Yep.
Anonymous, published by
for a reason.
For a reason. But obviously, one of the prime candidates possibly for this is Blewitt, because he knew all the gossip. And it is an absolute scandal of a book. It's almost like someone who, because when you read the Monmouthshire Merlin, it's very pro the establishment and the figures in it, and he's a right establishment man, But this book basically dishes the dirt on every single one of them. It's like these are the things that sort of been really bubbling in Blewitt's frustrated little head for years, and he's got them all out, and he's published them all anonymously.
It's a terrible gossip.
I don't think there's a single, a single Monmouthshire oligarchic family that doesn't get some form of pasting.
There are two that don't, and I'll tell you why I think it's Reginald Blewitt.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because the only two that don't have something nasty said about them are Reginald Blewitt.
No,
and in spite of all the evidence and material, Thomas Prothero.
Oh, that's interesting.
Now, that might be linked to the fact that Reginald Blewitt's sister Mary married Prothero's daughter. No, hang on. No, Reginald Blewitt's brother Edmund married Thomas Prothero's daughter Mary. There we are. That's
better. Yes, that's a bit more.
However,
less contemporary, isn't it?
Would you marry into the family of Thomas Prothero?
Would you?
Him as a father-in-law?
Would you have the guts to say no?
Well, Edmund Blewitt marries Mary Prothero within a relatively short period of time. This very healthy 31-year-old man is absolutely fine on the Friday, as it put in the newspaper, corpse by the Sunday.
No.
He dies very suddenly. Now, of course, that could be anything.
It could be, but it is.
His Prothero makes
it his Prothero,
to find out what he died of.
Yeah. Wow, isn't that interesting? Yeah.
It's
also,
definitely...
Prothero was somebody you didn't really want to mess with.
No.
Because he was, even if you were, weren't married into the family, there was somebody you really wanted to be very hands-off about. So that book also knows who it can attack under the mask of anonymity. And again, if it is Blewitt and he was revealing too many family secrets about the Protheros, it would have been obviously him as well. So perhaps that's another reason why
definitely
steers
I think it's the style was similar. He'd already done a little satire about Chancery in 1827. It's if it isn't Blewitt, I would be amazed. It's very much him.
It is supposition. He is just the prime candidate, though, and he's someone that would have all this information, floating around the back of a newspaper office, the gossip that's going on, because it is gossip essentially, isn't it?
It's also in the style of how he writes and the style of how he speaks. So yeah.
And you can what is quite interesting if you read the papers out loud, as I have on a number of occasions, you do get a sense of the voice, this slightly querulous little voice, this fussy, querulous, almost sycophantic on occasions, and belligerent to its lessers. He has a particular go at Octavius, doesn't he? Octavius Swinnerton Morgan. Yeah. When we have some of the best portraits of Octavius come from him, for want of a better phrase. So Octavius was an unpopular figure amongst them, but for interesting reasons. One of the reasons he condemns Octavius was for being pleasant to his inferiors, but delighting in being rude to his betters, not to his equals. And you think, well, sort of things that, somebody being nice to their inferiors is a reasonably positive thing to do, but he sees that as a weakness. So he's a very establishment figure.
There is, however, some substance behind Blewitt. He does work hard. I mean, I see him now as a squirrel buzzing around all over the place. He was twice mayor of Newport.
Interesting.
MP for Monmouthshire boroughs. Not a popular MP. He was when he used to get up to speak, there was hilarity in the House of Commons, not necessarily for the right reasons. He established a patent for creating malleable iron. He started the ironworks in Cumbran, which was still employing people until 1970. There was a tin plate work. So Blewitt's the man that brought industry into the Cumbran area. For good and ill, I suppose you could say. And he did the usual stuff. He made a fair bit of money, but remember, £60,000 for this out-of-control rebuild of the Abbey must have hit him. And he said of the Chartists, even though he was supposed to be a reformer as a liberal, he seemed to go native as soon as he got into the House of Commons. I hope that's not too unfair. But he did actually say, it requires courage to live amongst such a set of savages. Talking about the Chartists.
Oh yeah. Oh, you can see that attitude in the way he writes about he perceives as the lower orders, massively dismissive of ordinary people. Yeah,
and yet more in favour of reform than at one time, at least, than the Morgans, than the Baileys, than the other local ones. I mean, it's but
it's not reform for for the purposes that we think of it. It's about increasing the franchise so you can he can get a say, things like that. It's about broaden it out to sort of the more middle class and lower earners. Not that ordinary people didn't deserve a vote.
Yeah, the mercantile class. That's how they
class. That's that. Lowering the thing to that.
Anyway, so on the night when the Chartist Rising occurred in November 1839, Blewitt actually met some of them in Caerleon. The crowd coming down from Pontypool, and tried to dissuade them, saying, look, this is going to end in disaster. They did listen to him, maybe because of his voting record on certain things at that time, rather than his words and possibly feelings.
Interesting.
Yeah. But then they marched on anyway. And as soon as Blewitt heard about what had happened, this is where the Monmouthshire Merlin describes him heroically riding into Newport. He gets to Newport and he sees this scene of devastation, of dead bodies, of the injured mayor, the shop mayor, Thomas Phillips, and he basically takes over. Blewitt takes over as sort of deputy mayor. He does rather like the limelight, does Reginald Blewitt.
Yeah.
But he rode in and that's what he did. I suppose he was also very enthusiastic as part of the trial of the Chartists. Was around there when they arrested John Frost. And he was as enthusiastic as Octavius Morgan when it came to trying the Chartists.
Yeah. So that enthusiasm extended to hanging, drawing and quartering, I presume, did it?
I believe so, yes.
Charmer.
Now, he needed a bit of money. And so not only did he do all this industrial thing, he founded a bank. The Monmouthshire and Glamorganshire Bank. And this is a cheque which has survived from that bank. So he founds that, but unfortunately, in 1851, it goes bust. and everyone loses their money.
Oh, gosh.
There are stories of people going to the Great Exhibition from Monmouthshire and word reaching them in London as they're in the exhibition that they've lost all their money because the Monmouthshire and Glamorganshire Bank has gone bust.
Oh, gosh, blimey.
And by this point, Blewitt is out of money completely.
Yeah.
He's gambled it all. It's all, not gamble, but on his various ventures, and it's gone. So what does he do? Now, we've talked about an MP who cannot be, until 1870, an MP could not be thrown in debtor's prison. This is 1851. Nevertheless, Reginald Blewitt decides to run away.
Oh, God.
And he goes to France.
Oh, right. Gosh.
To hide from his creditors.
Yeah.
That happens quite a bit, doesn't it, in what we've written about, what we've read about over the years. So he runs away and he leaves Llantarnam Abbey. And he disappears. He comes back in 1868 because his poor unfortunate elder brother dies.
Yeah.
And long-term state in the words of the day, state of lunacy. And it really is really unpleasant when you read the descriptions. So he rushes back basically to see if he can get any money out of this. Because it's all been passed on to a nephew.
Yeah. And
he's trying to sort it out. And so he's trying to cause problems and he's trying to get money back and he sues them and he loses the case. Oh. So at this point, Blewitt goes towards London and then to the south coast and he leaves Monmouthshire for good.
Difficult. Can't say I'm terribly sad about that.
You don't miss Reginald Blewitt?
He's an entertaining villain, but he's definitely on the villainous side of things, isn't he?
Well, he did have a very sad end because 2 years before his death in 1878, you can find him on the books of the Priory Asylum, as it was then. He had been admitted as a patient. Oh, so just like his elder brother, if we check the records here, Blewitt, Reginald James, 11th of November, 1876. And he dies in 1878. So in the end, possibly, he ended up in the same state as his poor brother.
How old was he when he passed away?
He's about 80. He got to an old age. But when he died, I mean, the tiny obituaries in the Monmouthshire press, even the Merlin, tiny. You might get a paragraph, you might just get a line, but he was such an important character in the area. It's a surprise how quickly people forget, isn't it, really?
Or deliberately want to forget. Because his latter, when in his pomp, he was an important figure, but when he sort of, eventually has to flee the country through debt and then
losing everyone's money
and loses everybody's money, and quite happy to forget about Blewitt.
Oh, you might be right there. And after various problems again, the Llantarnam Abbey estate, which is pretty much on its uppers at this point, I mean, a nephew Blewitt Dowlin had it for a while, and there isn't much money, and they're starting to think of renting it out. And what are you going to do? Well, of course, it ends up in Chancery.
Okay.
Of course it does.
Yeah.
Of course it does.
Of course it does.
So it ends up in Chancery. And it gets bought in 1885 by Williams of Crumlin Hall for £15,000. The newspapers say that's a shame, really, because about 10 years before, someone wanted to buy it for £100,000 as a wedding present. And they wish they'd taken it then.
Yeah, don't me.
In the end, they only got 15,000. Then 10 years after that, 1895.
After spending 60,000 on the roof.
Yes.
Oh, gosh.
It passed out of the Blewitt family completely, and it was bought in 1895 by this gentleman, Clifford Corey.
Oh.
Who was the chairman of Corey Brothers and the son of John Corey of Dufferin. And brother of Reginald Corey, the horticulturist of Dufferin.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Dufferin Gardens, as it's known today.
Yes, I was at Dufferin Gardens recently and reading all about the Corey family at Dufferin Gardens. Yes. Oh, right.
It keeps in the family in that he was a Liberal MP as well. He tried to be one for Monmouthshire, but in 1893 he took on the South Monmouthshire constituency against the sitting MP Colonel Frederick Morgan of Rupera Castle.
Oh.
Which you're not really going to beat him in the 1890s.
Not going to beat Freddie now.
He came sort of 10 years too early. I think, to try that. He'd probably have beaten Freddie's son Courtney, but not Freddie in 1893. In the end, he becomes MP for St. Ives. He was an anti-vivisectionist, a great industrial figure, chairman of the Monmouthshire and South Wales Coal Association, had his own band, the Corey Band, the first brass band to be played on the radio.
Oh, right, blimey. Interesting.
It was the Tom Pentre Band initially, but he kind of sponsored it.
Yeah.
He was an anti-vivisectionist, like Lord Llangattock of the Hendra was, if you remember.
Yeah.
And he was also the head of the Welsh Protestant League. It's odd to have chosen to live on this site because he was virulently anti-Catholic.
Oh, gosh.
And he's living on a very
on a very
Roman Catholic site, isn't he, really? He was a little bit bitter because he thought he'd been hustled into marriage with this lady.
Oh.
This is Anne Lethbridge.
Looks very pleasant.
I'm sure she was very pleasant.
Why would one feel hustled in this way?
Well, she wasn't happy either. She sued him for divorce in 1895.
Oh, blimey.
Saying that he was jealous of other men. At Dyffryn, he intercepted her private letters. He wouldn't allow her to touch her own wedding gifts. And he dismissed her maid and stopped her speaking to other men. But at the same... Oh, and he tended to walk into rooms where she was completely naked. So, she wasn't impressed by all this, quite frankly, Anne, and you can't entirely blame her.
Yeah. As you would say, yes, put it away, dear. I've seen one in a book and I was not impressed.
I feel a bit sorry for Anne. So she lived at Belgrave Square, and she threw great sort of, as a society hostess, evenings for musicians. And one musician was even less chivalrous than Sir Clifford Corey himself. And this is the pianist Vladimir von Packermann. And Vladimir von Packermann is the great Chopin pianist of the day. But what he would do is he'd play and he'd sort of chip in. He'd chat to the audience as he's playing. Bernard Shaw said, yes, I saw Packermann. And Packermann did his usual pantomime performance with a little bit of Chopin added. But on one occasion...
Sort of Victor Borger of his day.
Very much so. He invites him, to Belgrave Square. She's in the audience. And von Packermann says, I will not play here. Because Lady Corey, I will not play in front of her because Lady Corey is the ugliest woman I ever saw. And then left. Very harsh.
Not really very fine.
No. Anyway, in the end, she
with that portrait, she looks rather attractive.
She outlived von Packermann and Sir Clifford Corey. And she left all her jewels to the V&A Museum, so a lot of them are there. She also loved Queen Victoria. Got a pair of Queen Victoria's pants, as so many people did.
Many
Queen
people
Victoria's
did.
knickers and a Queen Victoria black dress. She was a fangirl for Queen Victoria.
How many knickers did that queen have that she was distributing to everybody? They fetch up everywhere, Victoria's bloomers, don't they?
Well, she
I think people were just astonished by them, I think. Because nobody ever saw her. And all of a sudden, you've got these enormous pair of knickers floating around because she was a little spherical little woman, wasn't she?
Yes, she was rather. Now, again, very few pictures of inside Llantarnam Abbey, but we've got this one. And what it shows is very interesting because it's the Great Hall, and it shows a very sort of Jacobean style here with enormous portraits. And it had a minstrel's gallery.
Oh, yes.
Which isn't there now. In fact, it doesn't go right up to the ceiling now. The nuns put in another floor.
Oh, right.
So it doesn't have this baronial style view. Fortunately, someone stayed there with Sir Clifford Corey called Winifred Graham. And Winifred Graham wrote about staying there and gives us a wonderful little glimpse. She says there were huge fireplaces on all sides, which camouflaged the lack of central heating. Oh. She found out about this because when she went for her ablutions, the servants turned up with a bath on a rug,
Oh gosh.
Pails of water that they would take around the house. They seemed to be, I'm sure they were the fittest servants.
Yeah.
South Wales in that period, the 20s. But
this is the 20s.
1920s, yeah.
Still didn't have that sort of interior ablutions. Good Lord.
No. Lack of central heating it's even warm enough to warm the lofty entrance hall with these fires, with its minstrel gallery and long church-like stained glass windows. Eventually, when Sir Clifford did put in bathrooms, he never did anything by halves. He put in stately marble bathrooms that cost over £3,000 because the walls were so thick.
Oh, alterations. Good Lord.
Again, makes me think there's a fair bit of Tudor Llantarnam and possibly older in the fabric of that building.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Of course, when you start digging a place like that, you find things.
Yeah.
So she says that when they dug up, when he finally put central heating in, they were digging up the floor of the gun room and they revealed buried human skeletons, hundreds of years old.
Oh, gosh.
Viscount Tredegar, who was a Roman Catholic convert in the 30s when this happened, did apparently oversee the bones being taken to Buckfast Abbey in Devon.
Oh.
Which is better than he did with some of the bones that he got from Lisgool Abbey in Ireland. But again, that's a future podcast. When he went up the stairs, there were suits of armor holding a lantern, which was lit by electricity when electricity fired. You want to know how wonderful that would be?
Yeah.
It was said that Blewitt created the staircase by taking the beams of the tithe barn, the medieval tithe barn roof, and he turned it into the staircase of Llantarnam Abbey. So that was quite nice. But also, one of the things that I do like about this place, she also says that you had to go to church. They had a chapel on the estate. He wouldn't go to the church because he disapproved of the local rector for his illegal preaching. As Winifred says, that he was very low church, so Clifford Corey. Very low church. No flowers were allowed on the altar.
Oh, God.
Even changed the prayer book, so it had no mention of Catholic in it. It was all changed to Anglican.
Oh, Lord.
In fact, he voted against, one of the only members of the Liberal Party to vote against Home Rule for Ireland was purely on religious grounds, his anti-Catholic nature.
Yeah.
Must have driven him mad living at Llantarnam Abbey.
It's odd to think that the period we're talking about is less than a century ago, and you still got this virulent anti-Catholicism going on. Bizarre.
Yeah. But anyway, all the servants would have to go, and the butler would appear and in a stentorian voice say, "Prayers, Sir Clifford," and they'd all go to the private chapel. He had a new chaplain every week to say the service there. All the servants had to go there. If they didn't, they got into trouble.
Oh, well, yeah.
It's that sort of thing. But that was the kind of atmosphere at Llantarnam Abbey. He was quite a generous man to charities, and he's got this heart for anti-vivisectionism, but he just had this religious belief that was so strong that it guided him in this way. And he did alter a few things. He built this, the monk's cell, in 1905. Now, it was on the site of a ruined building.
Oh.
And he got that built, which I think is quite interesting. Now, what it was used for...
That's lovely, isn't it?
It's a lovely little...
little folly almost in a way, is it? It's a boathouse, isn't it?
Well, oddly enough, no. Although it is a lake. The lake's gone now. So these sort of dolphins here are sort of stranded with lawn. But that was the Swan Lake, as they called it.
Yeah.
So it was actually built for his polo. It later gardeners, Mr. Hooky probably lived in there. And it's got a 30-foot dining room.
Really?
It looks little, but it isn't.
Oh, it does, doesn't it? It looks, oh, crikey.
It's an extraordinary building.
Yeah, it is.
It was very luxurious. And Sir Clifford loved polo. And that was the polo pavilion where people would get changed.
Oh, right.
One source...
If you've got a water gate then in it.
I have no idea. I have no idea. But one source, which anyone who's watched these podcasts religiously will know must be incorrect, says that Sir Clifford Corey had the first private polo field in Wales. But we know that sort of 20, 30 years before Sir Clifford was in the area, dear old Reggie Herbert of Clither
absolutely
had the first polo field, and Reggie wouldn't want to lose that accolade.
Good Lord, no.
Now, this Johnny come lately.
Oh, Reggie. I'll come back to that later on.
Oh, sorry. Did you want to go back to the...
No. It's a side thought. I'll come back to it later on.
Yeah. So, as I said... So
the other conservatory area.
It's quite a long conservatory area, as you can see. But you're always finding things. This is the thing. And this is what I've said. And in 1903, Mr. Fowler of Cardiff was digging around and found incised memorial stones from the 12th and 13th century, which I love.
Oh, gosh. Oh, look at that.
So it's going way back.
Yeah.
And in fact, this one at the top here is the older of the two. And it says in Latin, "Here lies Gladys, daughter of David Bergwulf.
Oh.
Gladys, I mean, Bergwulf is a Saxon name, but Gladys and David are Welsh names.
Yeah.
And this one, 13th century, but we don't have any information about it. Fascinating stuff, though, isn't it?
Bergwulf, isn't it? That's interesting, isn't it?
Bergwulf, yeah.
David
Saxon
Bergwulf.
name.
Saxon name with a Welsh name. Isn't that fascinating?
Mm. Who knows what you'd find in those fields and if you were digging. Actually, there is, I have to say, since we're talking about fields, there is one ghost story, which isn't that impressive, but it is a ghost story that the sexton of Llantarnam Abbey's brother-in-law told the story that he was in the park one evening, and as he was walking in the moonlight, he saw and heard the bustling figure of a lady in grey. And this grey lady walked straight past him, and he went to have another look at her, and as she hit the moonlight, she disappeared.
Oh, obviously.
Now, I had used AI to create the scene, but it's far too ghastly. Far too ghastly. It did not make the cut.
If you ask nicely, we may distribute it to the subscribers. If you
want to see it, if you're a subscriber, you will see it.
Let us know, and we'll send it to you.
Absolutely ghastly. I don't know what AI was thinking. It is an imperfect technology, in my opinion, at the moment. And it really rather scared me. Yeah. So Clifford Corey died in 1941. It was said he was something of a recluse towards the end of his life.
Yeah.
So he was about 80. And by this time, I mean, life has really moved on. 1941, you're in the middle of the war.
Mm.
And so when he dies, the army take over, and he gets used as a supply depot during World War II. And then eventually as a camp for preparations for D-Day. I know there were I met someone once who said they saw thousands of uniforms at Llantarnam Abbey during the war. He opened this cupboard, this room, and it was full of army uniforms, American army uniforms.
Oh gosh.
And that was the last family to actually own the Abbey as a house, the Coreys, because of course after World War II, it becomes a religious institution. As
he comes back.
Say. The Sisters of St. Joseph take over, and it becomes their convent right up until last year.
Yeah, I know. I didn't realize they'd moved. What a shame.
Yeah, it's the end of that sort of long streak, isn't it? They changed a few things, obviously. There are still these lovely little figures. There's an archer.
Yeah.
There's a dancing man. Could be 17th or 18th century dotted around. They got rid of the conservatory in the 1950s and built a chapel.
Oh.
They also built a residential block in 1966. So, of course, they had to make it as their convent.
Well, quite, yes. It's a functional building, isn't it? Let's not be silly about it.
It had to be for purpose.
Would have fallen out completely if they hadn't been there.
This is what the tithe barn looks like.
Oh, gosh.
For years, people said this is a medieval tithe barn and that Blewitt took the wood for the roof to make the staircase of Llantarnam Abbey. Entirely possible. Some are convinced it is indeed medieval. Others, one person, but not definitively, says he believes it's 18th century.
Oh, right.
And therefore probably wouldn't be a tithe barn at all if it was 18th century.
No,
but it is certainly vast. It does look old.
Yeah.
But who knows?
No, exactly.
Who knows? One of my favourite little
walls
things.
Walls are very thick, though, aren't they? They're
very thick.
Incredibly thick.
You might bump into, maybe not the sexton's ghost, but as you walk around the Abbey grounds at night, you might run into this chap.
Oh, blimey.
Praying monk, he's still there.
Yeah, oh gosh.
In his little grotto. So Clifford Corey actually got all the bits together he thought were Tudor, built a grotto and put them all in there. And not just Tudor, sorry, pre-Tudor, I mean.
Pre-Tudor, oh right.
From the old Abbey.
Yeah.
Bits that he thought might fit, and he put them there. And they're all scattered now, unfortunately. I guess it happened in World War II when it was military. But which is a bit of a shame.
Yes, that is a shame, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And this is how it looks, or how it looked relatively recently.
Yeah. All right.
So it's a big place. If you go in closer here, you can see the rear. This is Wyatt's service wing, which was only one story. Yeah. And the nuns added a second story, I think quite tactfully.
Oh, they have, yeah. You wouldn't think it was, if that were the original building. I never noticed the second story, but I didn't. Interesting.
But when you've got the chapel and the residential areas that were needed to be built,
the conservatory's gone. Yeah,
it's still a very beautiful site, isn't it?
Oh yes, fascinating.
Of course, here you've got the nuns.
I like the labyrinth on the lawns. Very nice. Oh, that's the nun cemetery.
So many nuns, of course, died at Llantarnam Abbey, because quite often it wasn't a retirement home for nuns, but a lot of nuns, when they were very old, did end up there.
Yeah.
And one of the last nuns that I talked to was Sister Pauline, because she was at Tredegar House, of course, was the headmistress, and she died relatively recently. She had lots of tales. Yeah. There was this link. It's nice that, actually, thinking about it. The old link between, when they weren't dobbing them in, the Catholic Morgans of Llantarnam and their cousins, the Morgans of Tredegar, continued, really.
Yes.
With the Sisters of St. Joseph's at Llantarnam and running Tredegar House as a school.
Oh, yeah. Because they were teaching in mendicant order, aren't they? Because they also run the hospital, St. Joseph's Hospital in Malpas area.
Ah, now they did.
They did they?
I'll show you. Let me show you.
I remember when my father went there decades ago. They were still run by nuns of St. Joseph. There were nuns there.
As you can see, it says Llantarnam Abbey sisters to move to new home in New Inn. So they have now moved.
Yeah.
And the Abbey is being bought by Gwent Holdings Limited. And they are the firm that runs St. Joseph's Hospital in Malpas.
Oh, interesting.
That's why people think that, pretty sure that they're going to now turn Llantarnam Abbey into either a hospital or a hospice.
Oh.
I've heard both possibilities. I'm not sure how far down the line that is, but that's where we are.
Yeah, that's okay, isn't it? If it was a hospice, I think it would be lovely. A nice place to spend your last days.
I think so.
Yeah.
Oh, look, with old bells there.
Yeah, look at that.
I still think they still have the Corey bells, servants' bells. Well, in very good condition at Llantarnam Abbey.
Oh, right.
Well, they certainly tried to look after the place there.
Yeah.
It's going to be strange them not being there, actually.
Well, exactly, yeah. Yeah, it is odd. I didn't even realise that they'd gone, But you're right, it said end of an era. It is an end of an era, isn't it?
Certainly is. So there we are. I hope it made some sense, because there's so many centuries we had to get through. But that's a little look.
No, that's fairly interesting. It's nice to see something that you know of, and lots of people in this area know of, but don't really know the full extent of it, and the length of the history of the occupation of that site is quite amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hey, it's astonishing.
All the little connections.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know what we'll be doing next. We've got the 19th century Morgans of Tredegar Part 3 to come up.
Indeed.
So I don't think Blewitt will put in an appearance. Thomas Prothero certainly will.
Yeah.
We will even read from Memories of Monmouthshire in that podcast. How about that?
That would be good. Yeah. So Blewitt will pop up in his anonymous state, hopefully. The potential Blewitt.
If it is Blewitt, you will hear what he thought of Octavius Morgan. And and Goff has got it spot on. It wasn't particularly pleasant, was it? Anyway, if you haven't got anything else, Golf.
No, I'm fine, actually.
Fine?
No, I'm fine and dandy. No trouble at all.
Okay, well,
very interesting, that, Mr. Busby. Very different.
Well,
but if you do want to see the peculiar AI picture that was never shown,
it may not be seen by human eyes other than me.
We will distribute it to subscribers on request, almost like in a plain envelope.
So you're saying, yes, you get that on the community.
On the community page.
If you subscribe, you not only get the next video in your, when you click on your subscriptions, you also get community posts, which we've had since we hit 30,000 views.
Yeah.
The little updates we'll put in the community post. So that will appear on your feed as well. Of course, that does mean that if you're checking YouTube, you might see this hideous picture of the haunting of Llantarnam Abbey. And, if you've subscribed,
it's your own fault
for it, quite frankly. But thank you all for listening, as ever. And we'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.